Hello, and welcome to Be Inspired to Be Inspired, the place where everyone has a story to tell. And today I'm here with the beautiful Miss Lisa Thompson. And Lisa is going to be speaking to us about finding elevation and what that all means. And oh my goodness, you guys are going to love to hear this one. There's so much power in the things that she will be sharing with us today. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. It's really great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about where finding elevation fits into your life.
Oh my gosh. Well, the title for me, Finding Elevation, really encompasses what my memoir is about. So, in one respect, it's about climbing big mountains, and that requires, of course, continually gaining elevation. But I think much, much deeper than that, Finding Elevation is a story about what happens when someone finally stops believing what other people think they're capable of and instead finds their own voice and defines their own boundaries. And the book itself, I grew up reading a ton. That was sort of my best friend was books when I was a kid. And so at some point, probably in my 20s or 30s, I aspired to write a book. And even before that, when I was, a little girl, I would write my own choose your adventure stories, if anybody remembers those. And so I had a hard time, finding a topic or finding something that really felt would resonate with readers. And then in 2015, I was diagnosed with breast cancer and really started journaling just every day. Anytime I had a problem or felt scared, I would turn to writing as a way to work through that. And then I naively thought, well, this is a book, and you
were
nothing.
already putting in the works to the thing that you were putting off for so long.
Yes, for so long. Yeah. Yes, I was sort of forced into it, but I still at that moment knew nothing about the art of memoir. And I naively thought I could just sort of take these journals and make them, just tidy them up a little bit and that could be a book. And so I was, received several gracious and kind but direct rejections of that notion. And finally in 2019, took a year just to study memoir. I took courses at the University of Washington in Seattle, where I live. Wow. And, just realized how little I knew about writing, learned so much, made some really great connections. And I would say that really, this was about a 7+ year process of writing from the moment I thought, oh, I think I'll turn what I've learned in the mountains and through cancer into a book. It took more than 7 years for me to actually get to this point where it's about to be published. And, along the way, there were probably close to a year where I just didn't do anything. I couldn't even look at it. I had a pile of note cards and bright colored pens. And it felt so daunting to do the work I needed to do. And so studying for a year is really what gave me the motivation to make it happen. And I will say too, so I joke with people that climbing mountains is so much easier than writing about climbing mountains. And there were times when as I said, it was hard for me to get into it. And part of that was that I think to really connect with readers, memoirs need to be very vulnerable and transparent. And that for me to do that, it required digging deep into some things that I had very conveniently just sort of put to the side and we'll just not really think about, why my marriage fell apart or how, the emotions behind being diagnosed with cancer in your 40s. And writing was a very cathartic process and really forced me, and thanks to my editors for that push, really forced me.
Yourself.
Yes. Yeah. Which I have always been very good at not doing, just sort of something bad happened, moving on.
Yeah, you just push through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you can only do that for so long before it catches up with you.
That is so true. That is so true. And when you wrote your book, when you went through, your writing process and then a moment of, okay, enough is enough for right now, I'll come back to that. When you finally got done with your book, did you come to like a realization of, oh, I just can't even look at it? Or I don't want to see this right now. Like kryptonite to you. Did you go through that at all? And I'll tell you why I'm asking you that. Sure.
Yeah. I got to this point of like, I can't believe it's done.
Mm-hmm.
And it still feels surreal. Like this week, the books actually showed up at my house, and it still is like, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Yeah. So to me, it wasn't like, I don't want to look at you anymore. It was more like, wow, I can't believe this happened. Yeah. Okay. But tell me, has that been your experience?
That was my experience. As I was reading everything I could read about you, I'm like, oh my God, this woman is phenomenal, So I just want you to know that first and foremost.
Thank you.
You've done amazing things through your book, and even, we're going to get into this mountain,
Yes.
We're going to get into that. But we have some similarities when it comes to being able to push forward through the pain. And we have similarities when it comes to, putting others first and, just moving on with what we may be dealing with, and not actually dealing with whatever it is that we have held inside of us.
Yes.
Which
I think is an affliction of women. I think we're sort of taught at a very young age that that's how we deal with problems.
Mm-hmm. And we don't have to be that way.
True.
It's okay to breathe. It's okay to acknowledge the fact that, hey, that kind of felt bad, or that, that didn't settle right with me. And
Absolutely.
I am pissed off a little bit. It's okay.
Yeah. Yes, it's okay. I think I heard a quote from Jane Fonda recently that she said she didn't realize no was a complete sentence until she was like 50.
Yeah. And that's too late, that's too late. And if, you are, out, you're wonderful.
Thank you so much.
When writing, and you're pouring out your soul, and you're, divulging all these things that you're like, I don't know if I want to say this because it's going to show who I am.
Right.
It's going to divulge that broken marriage. It's going to, put it right there in black and white, the hurt and the pain.
Totally.
But just like you, I got through that process. And, when I got my books, when it came to my house, I was like, oh, wow. Okay. Mm-hmm. I see you over there. I was like, who are you? I'm talking to the books literally like, okay,
that's
Ryan,
awesome.
Really? You're about to say what? You're about to tell everybody what? Okay. But, even though your experience was a little bit different than mine when you got your books, I can relate.
Yes.
And yeah, I can relate. So in regards to climbing your mountain, I want to share with everyone who hears our voice. This was the second highest mountain. It's not was, but is the second highest mountain out there that can be climbed.
Right.
And she literally did this. And the spirit inside of you, when you did this, and I'll share something else, and I don't want to sound like, oh, this is like tit for tat, this type of thing. No, but there's a journey inside of people. And when you come into the path of another person that has that drive and that strength and that journey, it's so enlightening. It's so enlightening. Yes. So please tell us about what possessed you to even do that.
That's a great question.
Yeah. Love to hear it.
Yeah. I think sort of the root of it, the short answer to your question, and this is something that I learned through writing and loads of therapy, was that I grew up, as a lot of people do, not believing that I was enough and trying to consistently prove that. And I thought, well, if I'm just perfect, if everything is perfect, then surely I will be seen as capable, and surely I will know and believe, and others will believe that I'm enough. And of course, perfect doesn't exist. And we're enough just as we are sitting here today. And climbing became a way for me to try to prove that I was enough. So in the very beginning, I had moved, this is 2005. I moved to Seattle from the Midwest. I grew up in Illinois, no mountains in Illinois, as people likely know. So I didn't grow up like learning or thinking or even being surrounded by mountains. I honestly don't think I knew where Mount Everest was until I was probably in my 30s.
Wow.
So I eventually moved to Seattle. It's where I live today. And here, climbing is a part of the culture, right? We're fortunate to be surrounded by beautiful mountain ranges. And it's, it's just part of what people do on the weekends, hiking and climbing and running and skiing. And so it's a part of the culture here. It was not a part of the culture where I grew up. And when I came here, I was the most junior person in my role. I was the only woman in my role at work.
Wow.
And the men who, were not bad guys by any means, but it never occurred to them to invite me to go climbing with them on the weekends. Yeah. And they would come back to the office on Monday and they would have these. It wasn't that I was so drawn to the stories of them like fording icy rivers or, walking up steep slopes in crampons. It was that I was drawn to the camaraderie that I saw in them. And I wanted, going back to, me not thinking I was enough, I wanted to be a part of that because I thought then they would see me as capable in the office. And so rather than me doing the logical thing, which would have been to say to them, hey, can I come with you sometime? That really sounds like fun. No, I didn't do that. I just got mad about it. And I said, well, I'm just going to go climb my own mountains. And I had no idea what that meant at all. And so I started just hiking, around Seattle. And eventually in 2008, I attempted Mount Rainier, which is the highest mountain in Washington. Didn't summit that year, did go back and summit in 2009. But that first attempt at summiting a really big mountain, Mount Rainier's more than 14,000 feet. There was just something there that pushed me to want to do more. I liked the fact that people, I was back then and still sometimes today, I'm the only woman on a climbing team, and I was often overlooked. There were moments where I could, people would, in fact, when I climbed Mount Everest, someone posted on my Facebook page, oh, when I met you, I thought there's no way you could climb that mountain. And this was in 2016 that post was made. So for a long time, I liked the idea of proving people wrong. I liked the idea of that person seeing me.
I was just about to say, I love naysayers.
Yes.
And when it starts for me, back as a child, because someone dear to me said, you're not going to be able to do that. You're pregnant.
Right.
I was like, okay. They're not going to hire you. You're showing, you know, how are you going to take care of yourself? How are you going to take care of this child?
Yeah.
And that same day that this individual that should have been encouraging me for success no matter what,
Yep.
the same day they told me I would not succeed and not get that job, I got that job the same day. Yes.
Did you go back and tell them? Did they know?
Well, they knew because they had to take me to work.
Awesome.
You know. But you know, the challenges that when people say no, or it's not so much the tackle of proving someone wrong, but it's just defying the odds.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I love an underdog.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So keep telling us. Yes. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So that was definitely the impetus for me to start climbing, was just this desire to prove people wrong and to be, you know, show the naysayers that I could do something. And that kind of spite drove me for a long time, many years. That was my motivation. And it forced me too to be as prepared as I could possibly be, which, you know, through that process of training physically to climb a mountain, I ended up creating my own company where now I coach other people to do that. So looking back, it really is sort of full circle, that me, you know, feeling like I needed to be the most prepared person on the mountain taught me to really understand and learn what that meant physically and mentally. And that then turned into Alpine Athletics, which is my company today. And I get to talk about mountains all day long. Back in the beginning, though, that was not a part of, like, that wasn't my goal. My goal was just to not be the weakest person on the team. And then
that's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. In 2015, I felt like, you know, I've been climbing for a few years, and I felt like ready to go to the Himalaya, which is, you know, this huge mountain range that bisects Asia, and it's where most of the highest mountains in the world are. And I thought, you know, I'm just going to try. So there's this sort of magical threshold in high altitude mountaineering of 8,000 meters or 26,000 feet. Wow. And there's only 14 mountains in the world that are that high. And so I decided I would attempt an easy one of them, like one that's just barely over that 8,000 meter threshold, that's not too technical. And just as I was preparing and, you know, diligently writing out my training plan and thinking about the mountain, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And, you know, as a woman in her early 40s who thinks of herself as an athlete, that was, as it is for everyone, a very devastating diagnosis. I could not imagine how this body that I had relied on really to prove myself was now turning against me. I felt like my body was like, we weren't on the same team anymore.
Right.
And so, like most people, I like we were talking about in the beginning, I didn't spend a lot of time sort of feeling sorry for myself or wondering why this happened to me. To me, it was a project, and I needed everyone on my team who was 100% dedicated to this goal of beating cancer, and was very sort of, you know, surgical in particular about how I went about doing that, because I was determined to still go to Nepal later that year and attempt that mountain. That mountain's called Manaslu. And through exceptional healthcare, you know, that happened. I was able to travel to Nepal that year and climb. Yeah.
You're an elite performer.
Thank you. You know, I don't always feel like that anymore, but thank you.
You know, I have to say this, and, you know, I have met some amazing people, you know, since I've written my book, since I've started doing podcasts. And there's this gentleman, his name is Brad, and he speaks really great and shares very great motivational things on LinkedIn.
Awesome.
And he shared one time, how does it feel to be an elite performer? in being an elite performer in the workplace. And, I, for myself, took it a little bit further, not just the workplace, but even in my life in general. It takes me back to that day when I was told, by an adult, you're not getting in that job,
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that created it did help create who I am today.
Mm-hmm.
And even in, my situation in life now, I was questioning the type of person I am, the type of due diligence that I deliver, because if I'm on that team, or if someone's a part of my team, we gotta go, and we gotta go for it.
Like, we got stuff to do.
If this is the task, then you best to believe that these agendas will get achieved and more.
Yes.
And I am learning that not everybody appreciates an elite performer.
I think people are intimidated by that.
We can lose jobs because we're an elite performer.
Uh-huh.
And we could be doing the best of the best that the company has ever seen and lose a job because we are an elite performer. We can, make people feel a certain way just because we walk in a room.
Mm-hmm.
It's something in our eyes. It's something in our spirit. It's something in our walk. But I can't thank you enough that I'm meeting an elite performer.
Well, thanks to you as well.
No, thank you. The journey is real. And, and everybody always says, well, you're always smiling. You're always this, you're always that. And even in the midst of your own storm, what did you do? You performed.
Yeah. Yes.
And you didn't want anyone else on your team unless they were going as hard as you.
For sure.
So kudos.
Thank you. That's great to hear. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I appreciate you. I appreciate meeting other people like me, because sometimes it's like, whew, what am I doing wrong here? And it's not so much that you're doing something wrong. It's really not. It's just that it's just who you are. You're going to defy everything that's meant to block you, and it's not always a blocked thing or scenario, but you're just going to deliver,
Yeah. And I think sometimes
that you're better than the next person, but
I think sometimes those challenges are meant to test me, to really, force me to examine and question how important that goal is for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so when those obstacles come up in life, or even in the mountains, I think of them as a learning opportunity and a moment to just reflect on how badly do I want this. And I think those challenges too, there was a moment when I was climbing Mount Everest where I ran out of oxygen. I was at 25,000 feet, and I knew this point on the mountain should be pretty easy compared to other parts of the climb. It wasn't the steepest part. And I was moving so slowly. And at one point I just sort of stopped and couldn't find the mental motivation to keep going. And someone climbed up behind me and pointed out that I had run out of oxygen. And so I had a choice, right? I could have stopped and asked and waited for someone to bring me a fresh bottle. I could have turned around and gone back to camp to a lower elevation, or I could have kept going. And of course I chose to keep going.
So please tell me, how did you continue on without oxygen?
It was the hardest thing I think I've ever done, maybe the second hardest thing I've ever done in the mountains, because I was also not acclimatized, right? My intention in climbing Everest and every big mountain is to use oxygen.
For us that don't know what that means, what does that mean? Educate me. Please.
So the process of climbing, for most people, myself included, the process of climbing a big mountain requires that you acclimatize your body to the elevation, which means that you climb what are called rotations on the mountain. So if you get to Everest Base Camp, you're 17,500 feet, and you'll stay there for a few days, and then you'll climb up to maybe 19,000 feet, and then you'll come back to 17,000 feet and spend a few days. And that's called a rotation.
Okay.
And you'll keep doing that as you ascend the mountain. So then your next high point would be Camp 1, and you would spend a few days there, and then you would go to Camp 2, back to 1, rest.
So that makes your body adjust to the different levels.
So it forces your body to build more red blood cells. Your body realizes, oh, I don't have enough oxygen. I need to build more red blood cells so that oxygen can attach to those red blood cells, and my brain and my muscles can use it. And so that's a very arduous process. It essentially means that you climb big mountains twice, because you go up and down and up and down and up and down, and you go all the way back to base camp and wait. And then you slowly push to the summit in one successive camp after the other. When you're doing that with oxygen, you know, breathing bottled oxygen decreases the relative elevation by maybe 8,000 or 10,000 feet. I've read various things. So it does not mean when I'm standing at the summit of Mount Everest at 29,000 feet that it feels like I'm standing at sea level. It's more like it feels like I'm standing at 20,000 feet if I'm breathing bottled oxygen. And so this moment where I ran out of oxygen, I was at about 25,000 feet. My body was not acclimatized to breathing that air with that little oxygen in it. And so it was incredibly challenging, as you might imagine, to climb for the next hour or so without it. And I remember two things that came from that. I remember telling myself just to look at the climber ahead of me, and that no matter what, I was just not going to let him out of my sight. He was always going to be in my field of view. And in the end, you know, when I got back and reflected on that moment, it really made me realize how much more powerful our brains are than we give them credit for. Because in that moment, I was relying purely on mental toughness. I mean, my body, you know, literally didn't have the fuel that it needed to continue. And it was absolutely my mental strength and tenacity that pushed me to keep going. And the flip side of that is, you know, it can also push us to go too far, right? There could have been a moment where I pushed too far. And so I think in the mountains, what comes with experience is knowing where that line is and being able to stay on the right side of it. But that situation for sure taught me that we all are so much stronger than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah. That's wonderful. That is wonderful. So when you did reach the top, tell me what you did. I mean, I know you're like, that breath that says, oh my God, I did this. But, you know, you did it with that fear.
Oh, yeah.
That fear encouraged you to continue.
Yep.
So once you got there, how did that feel?
And fear, I'm glad you mentioned fear, because it's a very important thing in the mountains. I think that a little bit of fear is actually a good thing, because it keeps me alert. It keeps me aware of my surroundings, aware of how the weather is changing, aware of, you know, how my gear is. Too much of it, though, if I become too fixated on, you know, the fact that there's been rockfall in this area and it may not be safe, can be completely stifling. And so I'm always sort of balancing fear in the mountains, but it's always, like you said, it's always there with me. It was there with me on the summit of Everest. It was there with me on the summit of K2, the second highest mountain that you mentioned. And when I get to the top of any peak, I have this sort of no celebrating rule. And that is because you're halfway. there's still a lot of work to do to get back to safety, to get back to base camp. And most climbing accidents occur on the descent, not while people are climbing up. And that's because, gravity is not working as much in your favor. You're often facing away from the mountain, and obviously you're just incredibly fatigued from having climbed for, sometimes 10 or more hours.
Wow.
And so when I stood on the summit of Mount Everest in 2016, I had a list of things I wanted to do. So I wanted to, send some gratitude to the mountain and to everyone that had helped me to get to that point. And there were a lot of people, because I had fought cancer the year before and wasn't sure that I was going to be ready to do this. And, my doctors were supportive and encouraging, but also had no other point of reference to say whether I was, sort of healthy and ready. So I wanted to really just be grateful for that. And then the rest of the things on my list were very practical. Like, I needed to change my oxygen bottle, I needed to take a photo, and I needed to check my gear to make sure I was ready to descend safely. So it was a very, very practical sort of moment that didn't include celebrating. And, my summit, on my moment on the top of K2 was a little bit different than that. I still had this checklist, but my father had passed away from lung cancer shortly before, about 2 years before I summited K2. And so since then, I had taken his ashes with me to every mountain I had climbed. And that was important because my father was very critical in my life and in my development, and was not always a perfect man, but, I learned a lot of things from him, and he was always very proud of me and my climbing, though as a man who never or rarely left the Midwest of the United States, really couldn't understand this draw to climb big mountains.
You want to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So he was sort of, skeptically proud of me. And so it was important to me that I take his ashes to the top of K2 as well. And it's a very, for me, still emotional sort of scene that I wrote about in my book, but just taking a moment to be thankful for him and to, share everything with him that he had helped me to accomplish. So that summit was a little bit different. I still had this like checklist and no celebrating, but there was a lot of focus on just, being grateful for everything I had learned from my dad and for him being a part of this journey with me.
That's wonderful. Truly wonderful. I could talk to you for, oh my God. It's, and I can, geez, just listening to you talk about everything that, you have, shared with us today, and everything that you have written in your book that you're going to be sharing with the world, it's good things. I believe everyone has a story to tell, and everyone's story can help someone else.
So true. So true.
Your story today has helped me in the midst of my own storm.
Thank you.
So, I can't thank you enough, and I'm hoping that things now for you have developed into positive.
For sure.
Yeah.
There are definitely, I still struggle with feeling like I'm enough. It's gotten way better.
It's a daily thing, but you know what you said that means so much to me. As you were climbing the mountain, it's something that kicks in, that the mind is very powerful. Yes. And I can't express how powerful that is, because even in the midst of someone's regular day, it takes your mind to say, okay, it's time to get up.
Yeah.
Let's put our feet to the floor. We
Yes.
got this. We can do this.
Yes.
Despite what may be occurring or not occurring in our lives at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So without our mental capacity, we wouldn't be able to do anything.
So
And
true.
you've learned how to captivate that and turn it into that power that drives you. And it's wonderful. I love it. I love it.
Thank you.
I love it.
I think it takes another person who feels that way to recognize it too. So right back at you.
Thank you. Because I'm not, you can't share, you can talk to people and they'll be like, okay, but not everybody understands the depth of, and I don't know the word I'm looking for at this moment, but they don't understand the depth of what it takes to be that elite performer. They think it's normal, and it's normal for us, but it takes a lot for us to be who we are.
Yeah.
We're human too,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And we make mistakes too.
Yes.
And we don't, I can speak for myself. I don't feel like I am perfect, but it seems like I come across to others that,
Yeah.
But it's not that. It's such not that. There is so much that happens here every day in order for me to be who I am.
100%.
And it's a process. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a process too of accepting where we're at in that moment and realizing that that's enough. And I have been working on extending that not just to myself, but to other people. And to, people that I'm close to, just realizing that he's having a bad day too. And it's okay. I'm going to meet him right where he is, even though this is not in my mind how I thought this situation or scenario was going to play out. But that it takes a great deal, and I don't have this nailed for sure, a great deal of self-awareness and just compassion for ourselves and other people to do that. Which again is a daily sort of reminder to myself to do that.
Yes. Yes. And it's compassion for people that don't even understand, like even compassion for those that may be disrespectful or those that are hateful.
Yep.
Or those that aren't inclusive. So, when you are the type of person that, triumphs or tries to conquer everything, like, okay, you can be mean to me, but it's okay, and they don't understand why it's okay.
Yeah.
Because, it's like, it's a journey that you're constantly having with yourself, because when you finally say, hey, I'm worthy. And, when you finally know that your worth is priceless, everything else around you and everybody else around you, it's not that they don't matter, but you can walk with authority and you can feel okay with being okay and feel okay with understanding that, your journey is not for the next person, but for yourself.
Right.
And it's okay to understand yourself. It's okay to love yourself. It's okay to be okay.
It is.
Smile as beautiful as you do.
Yes.
It's okay.
It's so true.
You don't need anyone's approval.
No. And I think part of that too is just being myself. And, it took me a long time to figure out, and it's still evolving, but I realized in my 20s that I didn't have a good definition of who I was, and therefore had very few boundaries.
For whatever reason.
Yeah.
Because we all have different reasons, but for whatever reason, but I'm so happy that you have self-worth now, and it's a constant work, but you understand that journey, because
Yes.
I now understand mine too. And that's why I wrote my book, because I didn't want anybody else to have to struggle with that understanding of self-worth.
Totally. Yeah. And it like journey is an overused word, I think now, but it really, I don't know of a better word to describe
Yeah.
that process of,
Yeah.
of
And
wanting to answer those questions and then doing the work to figure it out.
not only are you doing the work, but you put that work into action with climbing that mountain. So, and again and again and again, you're phenomenal.
Thank you. That's so great to
Yeah,
hear. I appreciate it.
absolutely. And I thank you so much for giving me your time, for
Thank
sharing
you.
this moment of time. And I hope to be speaking with you again.
I would love that. Thank you so much. It's been a really fun conversation. I like it when these podcasts are just conversational.
Yes. And if you could stay on for just a
Yeah.
moment, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay.